The week before my wedding, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and taught me how to disappear. She did not call it that. She called it manners. She had a dish towel over one shoulder and a bowl of green beans between us, and her hands did not stop snapping the ends off while she spoke. When Daniel's mother speaks, she said, you let her finish. When his sisters laugh at something you don't understand, you smile like you understand it. When you disagree with something in that house, Naomi, you find a way to agree with it instead, or you find a way to say nothing at all. She looked up only once. A good wife knows how to leave a room without anyone noticing she was ever in it. I was 19 years old. I sat with my hands folded in my lap like a schoolgirl, and I did not understand yet that she was not teaching me a skill. She was handing me a coffin and showing me how to build it around myself, plank by plank, so that by the time I needed to fit inside it, I would already know the measurements by heart. My name is Naomi. This is the Amish Wife, the channel where hidden Amish wife stories are told from the inside. I grew up Old Order Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, married at 19, and I left at 25. If you are new here, welcome. If you have been with me a while, thank you for staying. Before I go further, subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments. Did anyone ever teach you how to make yourself smaller so that you would be easier to keep? I read every single one. In the outside world, a girl is raised to take up space, to have opinions at the dinner table, to be seen and heard and remembered. In my community, a girl is raised the opposite way. We call it Gelassenheit, the yielding, the calm surrender of the self to something larger, to God first, then to the church, then to the husband, then, if there is anything left of her, to herself last of all. Hochmut, pride, is the sin we feared most, and pride did not mean vanity the way the English use the word. Pride meant taking up room. Pride meant speaking before you were asked to speak. Pride meant believing your own thoughts were worth the breath it took to say them out loud. The Ordnung, the unwritten rule of our lives, was never printed on paper. It lived in the silences between sentences, in the tilt of a bishop's head, in the specific way my mother's voice dropped when she wanted me to understand something without her having to say it plainly. Everyone knows, no one says. That was the architecture of the whole life, walls built out of things that were never spoken, load-bearing silence holding up every room I ever stood in. I met Daniel at a hymn singing when I was 17. He was quiet, broad-shouldered, careful with his hands the way boys raised on farms are careful, because they have learned that strength without care breaks things. He was not cruel. I want to say that clearly, here at the start, because it matters for everything that comes after. Daniel was a good man in the ways our community measured goodness. He did not drink. He did not raise his voice. He worked from before light until after dark and never complained. He was, like most of the men I knew, a man raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, handed a script before he was old enough to know he was allowed to ask for a different one. We were married on a Thursday in late October, roast chicken and creamed celery and 7 kinds of pie laid out on tables that ran the length of my father's shed, nearly 300 guests, 4 hours of preaching before I ever said a word of my own vows. My mother wore her good dress. My father did not cry, because Amish men do not, but his jaw worked the whole ceremony like he was chewing on something he could not swallow. But it is that week before, the week she taught me to disappear, that I keep returning to, the way your tongue keeps finding a broken tooth. Because that was the moment the rules were laid, not on the wedding day itself. The wedding day was only the performance. The week before was the rehearsal, and my mother directed it with a gentleness that made it impossible to refuse. Disappearing politely, she called it once, almost by accident, and then never used the phrase again, as if she had let something slip that was not meant to be said with its true name attached. She taught me how to set my face so it showed nothing, how to leave my opinions folded up small, like a handkerchief tucked into a sleeve, ready if needed but never displayed, how to let Daniel's mother reorganize my kitchen the first week of my marriage without a word of protest, because a new wife who defends her own cupboards is a new wife who is already too proud for the family she is married into. The first small trigger came 4 months into the marriage. I had bought a different flour at the dry goods store, not the brand Daniel's mother always used, just one that was on sale, that baked up just as fine, maybe finer. I did not ask anyone before I bought it. It did not occur to me that I needed to. Daniel did not say anything that night. He ate the bread I made from it without comment, which I mistook foolishly for acceptance. The silence started the next morning. Not sullen, not dramatic, just an absence where conversation used to be. 2 days of it. 3. On the 4th day, my mother came to visit, and while she helped me hang the wash in a wind that smelled like it was going to bring the season's first frost, she said, without looking at me, "A wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes." I did not understand her yet. I would understand her a week later. That was Tier 1, the silence. Tier 2 came dressed as my sister-in-law, Ruth, who stopped by with a jar of chow chow and stayed for coffee and talked in circles around the actual subject for 45 minutes before she finally said, stirring her cup though she took no sugar, "Daniel's mother mentioned you bought different flour." She said it the way you might mention weather. She did not need to say more. I felt the temperature of the room drop 3 degrees, and I had done nothing but buy flour. Tier 3 arrived a few days after that, the bishop's wife, unannounced, with a basket of baked goods and a smile so warm it took me 2 full days to understand that I had been visited, not welcomed. I want to pause here and tell you something the structure of this life does not want told plainly. The pressure is never loud. It does not arrive as shouting or as a raised hand. It arrives as the slow withdrawal of warmth from a room you thought was yours to stand in. Everyone stays kind, everyone stays gentle, and you find yourself apologizing for flour. There was a night, not long after, when Daniel came home holding a pie his mother had sent over, my favorite kind, chouflé, still warm from her oven, and he sat with me at the table and talked softly for the first time in what felt like weeks, asking about my day, my hands, whether I'd slept. I remember how badly I wanted to believe that things were simply back to normal, that I had imagined the coldness, that I was the one who had made something out of nothing. That is what false relief does. It does not solve anything. It only makes you doubt the thing you already knew was true, and it makes you love the person doing it to you a little harder, because relief feels so much like love when you have been starved of warmth. It was Lydia who told me the truth of it, though I did not know to call it truth at the time. Lydia was an older woman in our district, 70 at least, who had buried a husband and outlived most of her own children's patience for her bluntness. She was arranging bread on a cooling rack at a quilting bee when I made some offhand comment about how tired I was of watching what I said in my own kitchen. She did not look at me. Her hands kept moving, turning each loaf a quarter turn as if the position mattered. "They do not hit us," she said. "That is not our way. What they do is harder." She let that sit in the air the way you let bread rest before you cut it. Then, still not looking up, "I lost one at the end, a daughter. Not the way you're thinking. She is alive. She is out there somewhere, English now, and I have not heard her voice in 11 years. She asked a question once, at your age, and the whole community answered it for her, so thoroughly that she stopped asking anything at all. And then one winter she stopped answering too, and she was gone before the frost lifted." She wiped her hands on her apron and walked away without another word, the way the truth-tellers in this life always do, sideways, unfinished, leaving you to carry the rest of the sentence yourself. I did not sleep that night. I understood, finally, what my mother had been teaching me the week before my wedding. She had not been teaching me manners. She had been trying to prepare me for a life that would ask me, slowly and without ever raising its voice, to make myself so small and so agreeable that I would eventually disappear entirely, and she had learned to do it herself so long ago that she genuinely believed she was giving me a gift. That was the moment the story widened for me. The way a lit window widens when you finally step back far enough to see the whole house behind it. This was not only happening to me, it had happened to Lydia's daughter. It had happened, I began to suspect, with a coldness that settled into my stomach and stayed there, to my own mother, who had likely sat across some other kitchen table 30 years earlier, while her own mother taught her the exact same lesson, using perhaps the exact same words. If you have stayed with me this long, thank you. These stories are not easy to tell, and I know they are not always easy to hear. If this is resonating with you, please subscribe and like the video. It helps more than you know, and it lets me keep telling these stories. The midpoint reversal came on an ordinary Sunday. We were at my parents' house after church, and my younger sister Hannah, then only 9 years old, was helping clear the table. Daniel's mother made some small correction, nothing cruel, just a comment about how Hannah should let the older women pass first, and my sister, without missing a beat, stepped back and said, "Sorry, I'll disappear." She said it lightly, almost as a joke, the way children repeat things they have heard said around them without understanding the weight the words carry, but I understood the weight of it instantly, because I had heard those same 2 words leave my own mother's mouth 100 times without her ever saying them directly. Hannah had learned the lesson already, at 9, without anyone sitting her down at a kitchen table at all. She had learned it simply by watching me. That was when I understood the real conflict was not between Daniel and me, or even between me and his mother. The conflict was a current running through generations of women in my family, each one teaching the next how to vanish a little more gracefully than the one before her, and calling it love, and calling it wisdom, and calling it manners. I began quietly to plan. I want to be honest that I will not tell the whole of that story today, because it belongs to a different video. The walking to the phone shanty, the egg money folded into a handkerchief and hidden inside a hollowed-out hymnal, the Mennonite woman in town who let me use her telephone without asking a single question. I will say only that it took me longer than you would think, and that the hardest part was not the roads or the money or even the winter that made everything harder. The hardest part was a single evening near the very end, when my father's health took a frightening turn, and for 3 days I sat beside his bed and thought, with a clarity that frightened me more than his illness did, that perhaps I did not have the right to leave a dying man's daughter behind. I chose clarity over that comfort. I chose it while holding his hand, which is its own kind of grief I have never fully explained to anyone. The night I left, I carried one suitcase down a lane I had walked 10,000 times, past a barn where the horses shifted and huffed in the dark, as though they too understood something was ending. I will not romanticize it. It was cold, and I was frightened, and I did not feel brave. I felt like a woman doing the only thing left that made any sense. What came after was its own kind of disappearing. The shunning, the Maidung, letters returned unopened, a mother's face seen once more at a distance in town before she crossed the street rather than meet my eyes. A father who by then had recovered enough to look through me, when I saw him once at a market, as though I were made of glass. The receiver clicking into silence more than once, because for years no one on the other end would speak. And here is the strange aftershock part of it, the part no one warns you about. 2 years after I left, in my own apartment, with my own key in my own palm, I stood in a grocery store and found myself apologizing to the cashier for taking too long to find my change, apologizing for existing in the space I was standing in, and I realized I was still doing the thing my mother taught me. I had left the community. I had not yet left the lesson. Some nights still, I catch myself listening for buggy wheels on pavement that has never once carried a buggy. It was my therapist, a small woman with reading glasses she was constantly misplacing, and too many plants crowded onto one windowsill, who first gave me language for what had happened to me. She called it coercive control. She told me that consent given because the cost of refusing has been made unbearable is not really consent at all. She said something I have never forgotten. The most effective systems of control are the ones that feel exactly like love. She told me that emotional withdrawal used as punishment has a name, that community-enforced compliance has a name, that what I had been taught to call manners had another name entirely, and that name was harm. I want to be careful here, though, because I do not hate the Amish, and I do not believe my mother was a monster. My mother was a woman raised inside the same silence I was raised inside, handed the same lesson at roughly the same kitchen table by her own mother before her, and she believed with her whole heart that she was protecting me by teaching me how to vanish. The system is the thing, not the people caught inside it. That community also gave me a work ethic that has served me every day since, and a capacity for stillness I would not trade. And sisters, Hannah among them, who I still write to, though her replies are rare and careful, who I love without condition, even now, even from this distance. If you grew up in a place where making yourself smaller was called being good, I see you. If you were ever taught that the highest compliment a woman could receive was that no one noticed her leave the room, I see you. If you have ever apologized for taking up space in a life that was, in fact, entirely your own to take up, I see you. You were not weak. And you were not simply well-mannered. You were surviving inside a system that measured your worth by how completely you could vanish inside it. Your no is a whole sentence. It always was. You do not owe anyone a quiet, graceful disappearance. You are allowed to stay exactly as visible as you are. Tell me in the comments what part of this story stayed with you the longest. And if you are ready to tell me your own story, I am here, and I read every single one. Subscribe to The Amish Wife. There is so much more I have not yet said. Until next time, choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.